Okay, let's dive into this fascinating source material you've sent us.
Yeah, it's quite something.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into just one piece. It's an audio analysis. And it takes a look at, well, what seems like a totally ordinary car commercial, you know, a Toyota Camry ad.
Right, but this analysis claims it reveals something far deeper, maybe even darker lurking within it.
Exactly. So the source itself, it's a really highly detailed interpretation, isn't it?
It is. It breaks down the commercial's visual stuff, the symbolic elements, and proposes this very specific, very complex reading of what it believes the ad is actually communicating, on a hidden level.
So our mission today, for you listening, is to navigate this analysis. We want to kind of pull out the key claims, the interpretations the source presents.
And help you understand the connections it's making between a car ad and, well, pretty significant religious and societal concepts.
And crucially, we're sticking strictly to what this source says. We're presenting its viewpoint. No outside info, no taking positions on whether it's right or wrong. Just what does this source claim is really going on here?
Exactly. We're just exploring the unique lens, the perspective through which this source views this specific bit of media.
Okay, then. Let's jump right into the core assertion. What's the central, maybe the most striking claim the source makes about this Toyota Camry commercial?
Well, the source's main claim is pretty dramatic. It says the commercial is deliberately, consciously crafted to show the rise of the Antichrist figure.
Wow. Well,
And not just that, but also the establishment of a counterfeit kingdom right here on Earth.
right, counterfeit kingdom.
Yeah, and it frames all this as part of a larger, what it calls a Luciferian Antichrist agenda.
Okay, so definitely not just about selling cars, according to this source. It sounds like it starts right down at the basics, like the car itself, even the name.
That's right. The source finds specific meaning in the name Camry. It points out its link to the Japanese word for crown.
Crown.
Okay. And the car itself, the modern automobile, well, it's interpreted as the modern man's horse.
The modern man's horse.
Yeah.
And I assume this horse then gets linked to some pretty powerful biblical symbolism in their interpretation.
Precisely. It's specifically identified as the red horse from the book of Revelation.
The red horse.
War, exactly. The source explains that in its reading of Revelation, the red horse represents war, division, even though, the commercial might initially look like it's offering false peace or just a smooth ride.
Okay, so we've got the car, the name, symbolically interpreted.
Yeah.
What about the person, the figure who's prominently featured in the ad? Who does the source say this person represents?
So the figure is explicitly identified by the source as the Antichrist.
Just straight up.
Straight up. And then the source connects this figure to a whole list of various ancient and biblical names and concepts, things it sees as related archetypes, deception, false messiahs, like figures like Nimrod, Iris, Tammuz, and biblical terms like the man of sin, the son of perdition, reference from Daniel and 2 Thessalonians. The source basically sees these as like recurring examples of the same deceptive force throughout history.
And the source highlights something really specific, maybe unusual about this figure's appearance, right?
It does. A key characteristic they focus on is what the source describes as the figure's masculine-feminine side.
Masculine-feminine side. What does that mean in this context?
Well, the source observes the figure wearing makeup and displaying, and this is a quote, feminine characteristics in a masculine form.
Okay.
And this gets interpreted very specifically. It's seen as representing an androgynous transgender antichrist.
Wow.
Which the source claims symbolizes achieving a balance between male and female energies, a concept it attributes to, quote, their teachings, implying, the agenda behind the commercial.
That's a very, very particular interpretation of someone's appearance. Okay, let's shift to the visual world then, the commercial builds. What about the CGI, the digital environment? What does the source make of that?
The whole visual style is characterized as a digital counterfeit transformation.
Counterfeit?
Yeah. So the initial black void you see, that's interpreted as an abyss or maybe a digital recreation of an abyss.
Right.
And then as these particles and cubes start forming, the source sees this signifying a digital transhuman recreation.
A transhuman recreation.
Yeah.
And this digital space being built, it serves a purpose. It's not just scenery.
No, exactly. This digital matrix, it isn't just a backdrop. It actually forms a seat or a throne for the figure.
A throne made of digital stuff.
Yes. And the source even calls it a transhuman womb or chamber.
A womb?
Yeah. It emphasizes that this CGI, this computer animation, is interpreted as a blasphemy against God's creation. It stresses that the source sees it not as real creation, but a false digital one.
Okay, so the digital world is fake, a blasphemy, a throne's being built. What about the action, the symbolism of the figure actually, like, rising up within this space?
The source interprets the figure's movement, his positioning as, quote, exalting himself above God to sit on his throne.
Right.
And riding the car, which is the red horse in this reading, remember that's seen as the act of taking his seat of power.
Okay.
The source also notes the figure seems to be on a runway.
A runway, like an airport runway.
Kinda, yeah. Which it interprets as meaning he's ready to run, specifically ready for the seals to be open.
The seals from Revelation.
Correct. But the source points out how that interpretation, him being ready for the seals to open, contrasts with the key biblical account.
How so?
Well, the source is very clear that, according to its understanding of Revelation, it's Jesus who opens the seals.
Oh, right.
So the commercial in this interpretation is seen as showing a counterfeit scenario. This figure is taking on that role, viewed through what the source calls a Luciferian propaganda lens.
Got it. Okay. The analysis then seems to dig into what the source sees as even more subtle messages, maybe subliminal stuff.
It does, yeah. The source points to really rapid flashes embedded within the commercial, things you might barely notice.
Flashes of what?
Well, it believes they contain symbolic imagery designed to affect the viewer. For example, flashes they interpret as blood are seen as reaching like a cellular level of impact.
Cellular level, wow. And there's a strong focus in their analysis on imagery related to the brain, too, isn't there?
Yes, absolutely. Flashes that depict the brain or maybe energy entering what looks like a plasma ball. These are interpreted as representing the mark of the beast affecting the brain.
The actual mark.
Or at least symbolizing it, seen as a rewiring of the brain or affecting the circuitry in the brain, that kind of language.
And how does the source connect these visuals, this brain imagery, to the idea of control?
It links this whole process to single-eye symbolism, the all-seeing eye type thing, and the eye in the commercial focusing or pulsing. These are interpreted as suggesting this whole digital or symbolic process is literally taking over someone's mind. The source also just notes what it calls weird orb symbolism as part of these quick flashes, too.
It really sounds like the source sees this figure and all these events, not just appearing on Earth, but kind of emerging.
Yeah.
Coming from somewhere else entirely.
That's a really central interpretation, yes. The source describes the figure and the events depicted as cracking through, like through a portal, almost through the veil into our reality.
Through the veil.
Yeah. This is characterized as a deception from a different plane of existence, coming specifically from the other side of the veil.
And the commercial shows stars, right? Like panning across stars. Does the source give that a meaning?
It gives it a dual interpretation, actually.
Okay.
Yes. So first, kind of literally as representing coming from a different place onto this earth. Makes sense.
Right.
But second, and the source seems to emphasize this one more, it sees it as counterfeiting a biblical promise, specifically the promise in Genesis that Israel's descendants would be as numerous as the stars.
Ah, okay.
So this ties into the idea of the figure coming to the promised land, meaning earth, but doing it through deception. It's stealing or mimicking that promise.
So all of this builds up, in the source's view, to this figure acting as a counterfeit king, essentially.
Exactly. The figure is seen as acting as a counterfeit Christ figure, attempting what the source calls a counterfeit transfiguration.
Counterfeit transfiguration.
Yeah, and this is symbolized partly by what's described as a wave, digital wave coming across creation. You see this visual effect.
So according to the source, he's trying to literally take Christ's place.
That is precisely the interpretation. Standing in the place of Christ, exalting himself as king, trying to be the king of the universe.
But it's fake.
Right. The source repeatedly stresses that it's presented as a complete deception, a great delusion.
Does the source offer a kind of theological reason for why this deception might exist, or why it might be allowed?
It does. According to the source's theological framework, this deception is interpreted as actually being sent by God.
Sent by God.
Yes, as a strong delusion, specifically for all those who sought after unrighteousness. Essentially, for those who are already inclined away from what the source views as truth. It's a test or a consequence.
There's also symbolism mentioned about a golden dawn.
Yeah, the appearance of a golden dawn or a very prominent sunrise in the commercial. That's interpreted as symbolizing what the source identifies as the New Age.
The New Age movement.
Exactly. A concept it links to secret societies and a shift away from, traditional belief systems. It's the dawn of his age, the counterfeit one.
And how does nature itself respond to this figure in the source's reading of the ad?
Well, nature is depicted in the commercial, obviously, mountains, oceans.
Yeah.
And the source interprets this as nature being affected by him, even bowing down to this figure.
Bowing down. How do
It points to imagery interpreted as mountains bow down, oceans roaring in submission, and a kind of dance of nature bowing down.
Interesting. And other visual elements, lines in the ad, they're also given these biblical interpretations by the source.
Yes, definitely. The commercial includes lines like, "The path here is made straight."
I think I remember that.
Yeah, and the source sees that as another instance of biblical symbolism being counterfeited, referencing, John the Baptist preparing the way for the Messiah.
Okay.
And the visual of the passing of the clouds around the figure, that's interpreted as directly copying the biblical depiction of Jesus' second coming, the Son of Man arriving through the clouds.
Wow, okay. So ultimately, what kind of kingdom is being depicted here, according to the source? What's the end result shown in the ad?
The commercial is seen as depicting the emergence of this new utopia kingdom on Earth.
A utopia,
Yeah.
but a fake one.
Exactly. The source describes it as a direct mirror and copy of the true kingdom of Jesus Christ. But it insists very strongly that it's just a mirage. It's all CGI, fundamentally false. It's presented as this great delusion that comes before the real thing.
The analysis also links some imagery to ideas of birth and a mother-son dynamic.
Yeah.
This seems to pull in some ancient religious ideas for the source.
It does, yeah. The source points to imagery of Zer the seed, or maybe the seed from the crops.
Yeah.
It interprets that as representing the birthing of this counterfeit new age.
To birth. Oh.
And imagery involving opposites, like ice and fire or fire and water, is also linked to this birthing concept, and even what the source refers to as sex magic.
Sex magic.
Okay.
And this is explicitly connected by the source to specific religious figures and concepts.
Yes, very explicitly. This whole birthing thing is connected to Mother Nature and the mother and son concept. The source sees this as a recurring theme throughout history in various religious forms.
Such as?
Specifically, it identifies this with figures like Isis Osiris, the Egyptian deities, right? Also, the mother goddess Gaia, representing female energy or the divine feminine.
Right.
And then the source makes a very specific and, pretty controversial claim here. It explicitly links this directly to the Catholic Church's promotion of Mary,
How so?
seeing her as a Diana figure, an Isis figure, and linking her to, quote, the sun, Tammuz, the false Christ.
Tammuz.
Yeah. The source concludes this point by stating, quite bluntly, they're always showing the same thing, implying this mother-son deception is a constant theme.
That's a really striking connection for the source to make there. Okay, so this modern utopian vision, it's seen as a counterfeit kingdom, and the source ties this into much broader historical theological frameworks of deception, right?
Absolutely. This whole vision, this establishing a kingdom on earth now, it's tied directly into what the source calls dominion theology or dominionism.
Dominionism. How does the source define that?
The source defines this as an effort to build the kingdom of God, or rather this counterfeit version of it by force or by human effort on earth before Jesus' actual return, taking control now.
And this is linked to specific structures or concepts.
Yes, this theology is linked by the source to the 7 mountains concept.
7 mountains.
Yeah, which refers to perceived spheres of societal influence like government, media, music, education, family, religion, business, taking control of those mountains.
Okay.
And also linked to the 7 hills in Rome, which is often symbolically associated with various historical or religious powers, usually negatively in these kinds of interpretations.
The source also claims this connects to historical groups involved in what it sees as deception.
It does. The source claims this whole agenda ties into age-old deceptions associated with groups like the Knights Templar.
The Knights Templar.
Yeah. And it specifically states that, according to an official website it references, the Knights Templar actually reemerged in the year 2013.
Reemerged.
According to the source, yes, with the stated goal of seeking dominion over the earth.
Wow. Okay. And the source sees a common thread running through a whole variety of different groups, contemporary ones and historical ones.
Correct. The source states flat out that this is the same agenda it believes drives really disparate groups. It lists the Freemasons, Luciferians, certain interpretations of Islam, specifically mentioning the Caliphate,
Okay.
and even branches of Christianity. It labels the New Apostolic Reformation, mentioning NAR and some of these liberal churches. It lumps them all together under this one agenda.
And ultimately, how is this big, multifaceted agenda characterized by the source? What's the bottom line?
It's identified as the same agenda as the beast 6666, the man of sin. The ultimate goal in this view is dominionism over the whole earth as a counterfeit before the real Jesus returns.
It really seems the source uses its incredibly detailed interpretation of this one commercial to basically reinforce its own specific theological viewpoint and its entire worldview.
That's very evident throughout the analysis, yeah. It sees this elaborate counterfeit being depicted and takes that as proof, quote, of the truth in what they're copying.
How does that work?
Essentially interpreting it as confirming the narratives found in the Bible regarding end times deception. Like, the fact that the counterfeit exists proves the original is real.
And that strong delusion idea we talked about earlier, that plays a key role here.
It's central, yeah. This strong delusion is what the source says those who seek after unrighteousness will fall into. It's kind of a self-sorting mechanism.
So based on this, what does the source advise believers to do?
Well, it offers guidance, urging them to stay on track, stay focused, praying and seeking Jesus Christ, being his disciples, telling others about the true kingdom, and acting as watchmen.
Watchmen.
Yeah, warning people of this counterfeit.
Stepping back a bit, how does the source ultimately describe the commercial itself, just as a piece of media within this whole framework?
The commercial is described as the start of something striking, and the figure in it is called striking in his image.
Striking.
But this striking image is interpreted as representing vanity and the image of the beast. Something that looks beautiful, but really it's not. It's all about deceptive allure.
There's also a connection the source makes to that phrase, war is peace.
Yes, the source explicitly links the underlying message. It perceives this false utopia built on deception to the paradoxical concept of war is peace. It notes it's the motto of the United Nations and claims that sudden destruction comes with this false peace. It's unstable, dangerous.
And the name Camry comes up again, but linked to something negative this time.
It does, yeah. The source quotes Strong's Concordance, that's a dictionary of biblical words, linking the Greek word sometimes translated as crown, which the source connected to Camry, remember?
Right, the Japanese word.
To the Greek word diabolos.
Diabolos.
Devil. Exactly. The word often translated as devil or slanderer, and the source emphasizes its meaning as making charges that bring down and destroy, so the crown is linked to destruction.
The source's worldview, as presented here, it seems to incorporate even these seemingly negative forces, like Satan, into a larger divine plan somehow.
That's a really key aspect of its theological perspective, yes. The source presents the idea that Satan is used by God in his plan, almost like a, quote, predictable wind-up toy playing out his evil nature.
A wind-up toy.
Yeah. So this entire unfolding of deception, this whole commercial's hidden meaning, it's all seen as part of a much greater plan where, in the source's words, everything works together for the good of those who love God, even the bad stuff.
And what's the ultimate hope, then? What does the source express despite all these warnings about deception and counterfeit kingdoms?
The ultimate goal, the ultimate hope, as presented by the source, is the eventuality establishing the true kingdom of righteousness of Jesus Christ, identifying him as the Lion of the tribe of Judah who will return and make everything new.
So a future restoration.
Yes. The hope is to live in the true kingdom, the true millennium, a future golden age under divine rule.
So in this view, even the existence of this counterfeit, this deception, it serves a purpose in that bigger plan.
Yes, absolutely. In the source's framework, this counterfeit deception serves a specific purpose in God's plan, to separate the wheat from the chaff, or another biblical analogy, the wheat from the tares.
Distinguishing true believers.
From those who are deceived, yeah.
Yeah.
And the source expresses hope for a future place without sin.
The idea of divine control, a predetermined plan, seems really strongly emphasized throughout the whole analysis.
It really is. The source stresses that what will be is all part of God's bigger plan. It urges believers to keep our hope anchored in that knowledge, rather than getting overwhelmed by all the apparent deceptions around us.
There's also a specific warning the source gives, isn't there, about a perceived spiritual deception that might be impacting religious communities themselves.
Yes, that's important. The source specifically warns against the danger of this divine feminine kundalini deception counterfeit spirituality.
Kundalini, yeah.
Yeah, saying it's rising and affecting the church. Seeing it as an abomination that's standing in the holy place. That's very specific language, referencing biblical prophecy about desecration.
So the concern is that even religious spaces aren't immune.
Exactly, that they're vulnerable to the same perceived counterfeit spirituality.
But despite all these layers of warning, all this perceived deception, the overarching message from the source, it ultimately seems to land on hope. A steadfast hope in some future divine intervention.
It absolutely ends on that note. The source reiterates a wonderful hope. And that hope is rooted in the belief that eventually every knee will bow and every tongue confess that the true Jesus Christ is Lord.
And the commercial's picture of nature bowing down for the source, that's just a cheap copy of this ultimate real event.
That's exactly right. Similarities are drawn between the commercial's imagery, the mountains bowing, etc., and the source's belief that all of nature will be released from his bonds as he comes back. Meaning, when the true Messiah, Yeshua HaMashiach, returns.
Yeshua HaMashiach.
Yeah.
Hebrew for Jesus the Messiah.
Correct.
And what's the final vision the source presents for what happens after this true return?
In the source's view, the Messiah will build the true kingdom. And part of that is bringing the desolate land to fruition, specifically mentioning making the dry places first, a restoration of creation. And the source places assurance firmly on the belief that he is in control, none of us, that it's his power, his truth, he makes our path straight.
So the final message is one of resilience, really. Hope in the face of all these perceived deceptions.
It is. It's a message grounded in the belief that ultimate truth, ultimate life comes through the Messiah. The final thoughts from the source are essentially, quote, even on the back end of this, he will come through the clouds. It's an encouragement to listeners, do not be discouraged, stating that all of these things will pass away and the true Messiah will come and bring the new Jerusalem, referencing that biblical vision of a renewed creation, a perfect city.
Wow. I mean, this source really offers an incredibly detailed, incredibly layered interpretation of just a few moments of a car commercial.
It's quite something.
Connecting it to ancient prophecies, global agendas, deep, specific theological concepts. It truly highlights the intensity of meaning that can be read into cultural products. You know, depending on the very specific lens you happen to look through, and how a source can weave seemingly disparate symbols, the car name, the visuals, the figure's appearance, into this comprehensive narrative about, well, the state of the world and where it's headed.
It really demonstrates a whole methodology of symbolic analysis, doesn't it? Finding these interconnected meanings across advertising, history, scripture, and arriving at this complex, overarching worldview.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Consider this provocative thought, just based purely on what the source presents. If seemingly ordinary parts of our culture, like a simple car commercial, can be interpreted by some people as deliberate, hidden messages tied to ancient prophecies and global agendas.
Yeah.
What does that tell us? Not necessarily about the commercial itself, right? But maybe about the vastly different ways people perceive the world, the different ways they interpret information and make sense of everything around them, especially now in this age of just information overload.
That's a great point. It highlights the diversity of interpretation.
It certainly gives you something to think about next time you see an ad, doesn't it? Just how many layers someone might be seeing